This is Justin with Style as Substance. The show ended several months ago, but I only recently watched it. I was never in a hurry, but seeing that I defend Zack Snyder's film adaptation of Watchmen, I was curious to check this out, and I'm sure some of you are curious to hear my thoughts. This video is a little more off the cuff than others, more ranty, less coherent, less analytical, maybe more mean too. These are just my unfiltered thoughts on HBO's Watchmen. I'm not really against people finding new ways to retell or continue stories that they didn't originally conceive. If the storyteller wants to find new direction and do their own thing, like Kubrick did with The Shining, that's fine by me. But in assessing the work, it's only fair to compare and contrast. The two works are different, but related texts. But with this series specifically, the graphic novel by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons is meant to be canon. Everything that happens in the original comic, down to the finer details of characters' costumes, is supposed to have taken place or existed in this world. Now, there is some interesting world building early on, and quite honestly throughout the series as a whole. The political trajectory of the nation does make some sense. What was once thought of as right now becomes left, and vice versa. Though many things virtually stay the same. Nothing ends. Nothing ever ends. The Ku Klux Klan became the 7th Cavalry and adopted Rorschach's journal as the absolute truth, thus the absolute good. The thing is, the Cavalry are pretty much the only people who hold to the truth, which is a bit weird to say the least. Though it's not really an inherent fault to propose dynamics like this. Perhaps there is something to be said with the everyday liberal American, rejecting even the notion that something that disrupts the status quo could be true. But I don't really know. It doesn't go very far with this. I was definitely frustrated while watching it. I had the feeling that Damon, Lindelof, and the other writers and directors don't really understand the graphic novel. Or this is how it comes across anyway. Unless, of course, they do get it and are wanting to counter Alan Moore and the ideological leanings of the comic. The series seems less interested in critiquing the status quo, power structures, or even superheroes for that matter. On the contrary, it seems to relish in the idea of superheroes and loves them. There are just some bad apples that need to be tossed out. Hooded Justice, the first superhero, is revealed to be a bisexual black man. In one of the highlight episodes, we see this man's backstory, full of pain and fear of a racist higher order. He had survived the Tulsa race riot in 1921. He then became a cop and experienced racism within the force. However, he decides to fight back by donning 2 masks, one being his hood and the other being Caucasian makeup applied to his eyeline.
And if you want to stay a hero, townsfolk gonna need to think one of their own's under it.
People see white people with masks as heroic, and black people with masks as dangerous. Hooded Justice inspired a whole wave of superheroes, which highlights the often sidelined and unrealized historical accomplishments of black people in the United States. But if the original source material is meant to be treated as gospel here, this message should be a problem. Police and superheroes alike are not the good guys in the story. This is an extremely white power fantasy that the so-called heroes are living out in their day-to-day lives. The Klan members aren't supposed to be far removed from the vigilantes that fight them, right? Even Hooded Justice was thought of as something like a Nazi in the comic. This critique of power structures is where Lindelof and Snyder differ greatly. Snyder understands the comic. Lindelof doesn't, unless he is trying to respond to Moore with these liberal ideas. Perhaps he has more faith in these power structures. But I don't think that's what he is consciously going for. I don't quite see it that way. The series seems hardly concerned with evaluating these power structures and the issues they bring, and how said issues are intersectional with racial relations. Instead, the series is more interested in adopting the aesthetics of race issues and Blaxploitation empowerment. Both Hooded Justice and Sister Night are inspired by films before becoming superheroes and fighting crime. However, the media, and more specifically films, are framed as a negative in other ways. Consider the mind control subplot that went almost nowhere. Films were projected in certain ways so that they could be used to turn black people against each other.
There was a riot in the theater. Cyclops is using film projectors to turn Negroes against each other.
The power of media conditions people to think certain things about themselves and about their class and subcultures. But what does the series say about this? I don't think it says a whole lot. The strange political implications carry on in the series with the character Dr. Manhattan. He spends considerable time recreating Genesis on Europa. He was looking for another galaxy in the comic, but whatever. Dr. Manhattan inexplicably returns to Earth and falls in love with the protagonist. He then assumes the identity of a black man, and only through a casual throwaway line do we get any semblance of overt criticism of this appropriation.
This kind of appropriation is considered quite problematic now.
Dr. Manhattan behaves nothing like he does in the comic, and the series couldn't resist taking a few cues from Snyder and amping up the public perception of Manhattan as being a god figure. The comic mentions this in a few places, but it's really the film that makes him borderline divine. Though at the same time, in the series, we never feel that he is, in fact, godly. It's just said that he is. He seems really weak and tender, actually.
I've always been in love with you.
He states the last time he felt fear was in 1959.
What do you know about fear? When was the last time you were even afraid?
It's 1959. I'm in Gila Flats, New Mexico. I left my watch inside the intrinsic field chamber, and now I'm locked inside, fully aware that when the countdown ends, my skin will burn off of my body.
This is referencing a line not from the comic, but instead from Snyder's film.
I feel fear for the last time.
And then you put yourself back together piece by piece. And then you were never scared again.
Yet we don't really get the sense that he doesn't feel fear. When he gets sucked up into a vortex by the 7K, he certainly acts fearful to some extent. This all leads us to the ending of the series, which in my opinion is a complete low point, full of quirky, unapologetic, and uncritical melodrama. I thought it was really, really bad. It was a save-the-day spectacle with little nuance and little commentary.
I saved humanity, you ignorant hayseed. Now, if you'd kindly stop distracting me, I would very much like to save it again.
It flips so many of the ideas from the comic on their head, undoing everything.
Because the world will end.
Yeah. People keep saying that, but it never seems to happen.
Yet I still don't see it as a proper counter, because it loves the idea of the characters and the world so much.
Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we're talking about yet another Hollywood project that is not only getting woke, it's also shitting all over its source material as well. Watchmen was a team of straight white heroes, and it's become one of the most beloved comic book series of all time. So it really shouldn't surprise us that in current year, they're going to stage an SJW minority and LGBTQ takeover of this series now as well.
Reactionary YouTube channels like No Bullshit complain about the show being woke.
And having the lead as this black woman can't go unnoticed here either. It's like they're black and girl washing this thing. Because as I said before, the original comic and movie were a team of straight white heroes. So making this new lead a minority female and making the story anti-white, well, that's a pretty dramatic shift.
The problem with the show is it's not woke enough. I do think there are sincere attempts at times to engage in these ideas, but it's backed by a short-sighted lens of power structures and liberalism. Now, there are definitely good moments sprinkled throughout here. Strangely enough, I do find a lot of it compelling. And there's something satisfying about Jeremy Irons as an older Adrian Veidt, living to see his plan for world peace completely fail before his eyes. He spends his time in farcical and mundane situations, growing madder and madder. Though it's a shame that this arc goes south so hard. There are enough weird surprises in store in most episodes to unsettle the viewer and keep them interested. The nostalgia overdose sequence, while containing questionable implications, is visually enticing and cathartic. It gives us hope for the superhero, although I am not sure that is the best direction to take this property. But yes, it is extremely satisfying to see Hooded Justice beat up all the racist. Strange, but quite satisfying. The 5th episode is pretty good in general, all things considered. The squid monster deserves an on-screen appearance, and Looking-Glass is one of the few nuanced characters. I liked seeing where he came from and where he ended up. He is confronted with the truth, and it rattles his bones. Because it seems that he sees the lie and murder of countless innocents to, at least in some ways, be justifiable.
If it hadn't arrived when it did, we would all be ash. It united us against a common threat. Does it ever end? Of course it does. Because we are all in a tunnel, and every tunnel ends. It ends with light.
So there are in fact good moments here, but it's few and far between. Many people will be quick to point out that at the very least, this show gets Watchmen better than Snyder does, which is complete nonsense. Whatever, I'll talk about Snyder's film now. Maybe Snyder missed out on some of the finer details and nuances of the comic, but he understood one of its core themes, that being power, and how people abuse power. Alan Moore sought out to criticize power structures in society, and how they manifest in comics. The superheroes' call to action was driven by their own power fantasies. Dr. Manhattan has all the power in the world, and the United States uses him so that the nation would become a literal superpower. Snyder really took this idea and focused on it closely, and in some ways made the story better. Instead of people cursing Dr. Manhattan out and just thinking he's some blue guy in a funny suit, he's treated more like a god. They can't double-cross him or criticize him. This is why the Soviet Union stockpiles nuclear weapons, to respond to this unrestrained power.
Maybe the reason why the Soviets are doing these bomb tests is because they feel threatened by Dr. Manhattan, cornered.
I think this is why I also find the movie's ending to be stronger than the comic. It plays on this godly power as a source of fear. Adrian Veidt uses Dr. Manhattan's image to unify the world in fear of pseudo-divine intervention. And no, the movie doesn't glorify the superheroes or any of that nonsense spewed by bad videos on YouTube. At least not any more than the comic does. Snyder doesn't make Rorschach out to be any cooler than Moore does, and Moore doesn't completely villainize him either. There are good but misled qualities about Rorschach's libertarian ideology. That's why the therapist can't help him with his liberal sensibilities. And you're supposed to find the action violence sort of cool in the same way you do with movies, but then we dwell in it and it becomes cold and alienating. It's gross and off-putting because that's the nature of these power fantasies.
In a normal comic book film, or you know, the violence you would get would be really sort of morally clear, you know, where there's a little bit, you get a little bit of punishment for assuming that everything's going to be like, you know, glossed over and clean and easy to understand. You know, I think that's where the movie kind of comes at you a little bit. In some ways, you know, Alan's punishing us, you know, for liking violence, you know, for sort of accepting that kind of violence. And so, unless it's completely over the top, it doesn't really send that right message of, no, really, you're enjoying this because it's you shouldn't be, you know.
The deaths at the end aren't shown like they are in the comic because we see things from the Watchmen's perspective. The deaths are peripheral, just like the atomic bomb dropping on Japan being peripheral in the opening credits. Also in that same scene, we see a clear criticism of power structures through the military police gunning down the hippies. If cops are bad in the film, then superheroes are worse. It's all in the text. In contrast, what we have with the series is completely uncritical, Hollywoodified, casual violence fueled by quirk and aesthetic, and a hardly critical exploration of oppressive structures. The cops are good and the superheroes are better, aren't they? Dr. Manhattan is a tender and loving black man, not an apathetic ephebophile. Laurie cracks jokes, becoming something of a second comedian. Ozymandias will get sucker punched, instead of dodging every blow. Squid will rain down on the unjust, and the FBI will win the day. Things do end, actually. Everything actually ends. Sure, some of it is entertaining, but is entertainment really what we want from Watchmen? Special thanks to my patron Yakov Janoi. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy my content, consider subscribing and sharing my work around. If you really enjoy what I do and want to be included in my end credits, consider donating to my Patreon. I've made a video on the opening sequence of Zack Snyder's Watchmen, so if you have an hour or so to spare, make sure to check that out. Until next time, stay stylus substanized. Click the subscribe button to get stylus substancized. I can't do it. Bye.